Well, all right. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 13. So, that was cool, right? It is pretty awesome. So as we turn to 1 Samuel before you. So, imagine you are at the grocery store, and it is packed. So, Walmart on a Saturday, it is packed. You go there, the parking lot's full, you're like, okay, there's going to be a lot of people in there. You go in, you get your stuff, and you head to the checkout line. And the checkout lines are backed up. And you find one that has maybe 2 people in it, and it's about your time to get up to that line. So you're getting in line, there's someone in front of you, and this person is checking out. And they've got ridiculous amounts of stuff. They got so much stuff. And then they get to the time, they swipe the card, and the card is declined. So their card is declined, so they start fumbling, they find another card, and the chip reader is not working for the second card. So they're putting it, not working. So they start fumbling through their bag, their wallet, their purse, whatever they have, trying to find whatever cash and change that they have. They spend some time going through this. They find enough to buy some of the items that they have. So now they're taking the time to pick through their items. They're picking through the items, which ones can I get today? So they're picking through their items, and then they're done. You get up to there, and your wallet's in the car. Or let me talk about this scenario. Who has driven down I-90, I-39, wherever, and you are going along, and you're like, all right, I'm about to pass this line of semis. And as you get up to the line of semis, the semi goes to pass the other semi. And 10 miles down the road, 30 minutes later, he finally gets around the other semi because he was going 0.5 miles per hour faster than the semi next to him. So with that feeling in your soul, with those feelings in your soul, let's read 1 Samuel 13, chapter 8. So it's talking about Saul and his unlawful sacrifice, and it said, Saul waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me, and the peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself, and I offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he had commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be a prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord has commanded you. So Saul, obviously lacking good head on his shoulders, as if you read through the 1 Samuel and everything, Saul has some issues. But aside from that, what else was he lacking? Now, looking at Saul's perspective, right? Looking from his perspective, okay, I got this army. Samuel said, I'm going to be there in 7 days. He's not here. The people see that I'm anxious, and they are starting to wander away. They're deserting my army. And the army I'm about to fight is right there, breathing down my neck. If you're Saul, do you not do the same thing? Do you not just like, here, let me take care of this. I'm going to get this done. Let me do this. Now, when I joined the army, I had full intention of joining the Marines. I walked into that recruiting office fully intent on being a Marine. Now, right out of high school, I had already been talking to a Marine recruiter, but then I moved to Colorado for a while. But then I came back, I worked for my dad for a little bit, and after I was like, I'm done with this. I'm like, I'm going to be a Marine. I'm going to go in. So I go to the recruiting station, and the Marine recruiter was not in his office. He was not there. So I walk next door to the Air Force recruiter. The Air Force recruiter was not in his office either. So I'm leaving the station. It's like, okay, whatever. And as I'm leaving, I hear, hey, can I help you? And it's the Army recruiter. 6 months later, I am headed down to Fort Benning, Georgia in a infantry airborne ranger contract, which airborne ranger, overbooked, I got booted. You know, being a W has a lot of disadvantages. And I'm sorry to Taylor for moving you from the middle of the alphabet to the end of the alphabet. And in the military, everything is alphabetized. So I waited in a lot of lines, and it is miserable. But I rushed into this decision, right? I rushed into it because I'm like, okay, I was going to be a Marine. And you know why I wanted to be a Marine? Because they have better uniforms. They seriously do. Their uniforms just look better. That was my reasoning for joining the Marines. When I thought I was going to be a Marine, I'm like, not only do they have a harder boot camp, and I wanted like a hard boot camp, so I wanted that. But I'm like, their uniforms just look so good. They look so good walking around. And so I'm rushing into these decisions. So patience, right? Patience is something that did not reside within my being at this time. And that's our society, right? We live in a microwave society. We want what we want it now. Fast food, right? Give me my food now. If you wait in a fast food line for more than like a minute, you're like, what the heck? I should have just gone to Applebee's. I'm dying here. I want my food. I'm starving to death. Give me my Big Mac. I'm going to die here. Please, hurry up. Oh. And you get a little short with the people in the window. And you get antsy. And the McDonald's had that, if you don't get it within like less than a minute, it's free. But they stink, so they had to take that down because everything takes more than a minute there. So, but like, you go to get your oil changed. Where do you go? You go to Quick Lube. You want your instant dinners, a microwave dinner. YouTube, you go on YouTube. If that advertisement before your song lasts more than 5 seconds, or you don't get the skip button, if you have to wait 15 seconds to watch your video, oh my goodness, forget it. I'm just going to pick the next video. Hopefully the ad's shorter. I mean, we want the faster chargers for our phones. We want instant access to all the possible information we can have right now. We have it all, we want it all, and we want it right now. I have a short video to show you that has to do with this. All right. Was that not the longest 2 minutes ever? Like, I timed it. It's 2 minutes, but it just seems like you're just like, what is going on? Like, it's just going. And that whole, just put in the oven, that'll take 3 years. Like, how many times do you get, like, a food that you can microwave or you can oven, and you know it's going to taste so much better if you put it in the oven. But you don't want to wait for 15 minutes. You want it in 30 seconds. So Saul has a patience problem. He's leading this Israelite army, and at the time, since the Philistines had control over the weapons at this time, the Israelites are basically armed with pitchforks and farm tools. And the Philistines have swords. So there's this pitchfork army sitting here waiting for the Lord's chosen, Samuel, to come and offer the sacrifice so they can go and fight against people who have swords. And so they are facing on this army. Their leader is starting to get anxious. And he's like, I don't know what to do now. Samuel said he'd be here. And so the people are like, well, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I'm out of here. Forget this guy. And they're just starting to dip out. And Saul, in his wisdom, is like, just let me do it. Let me do it. And so he does this. He takes himself, puts himself above God's priests, puts himself, and then he offers the sacrifice. And this is the tweetable quote or the postable quote or whatever you want to do. In your impatience, God's blessings can be missed. So this is what Samuel tells Saul. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Ouch. Ouch. Saul is just trying to do what he thought was right. Saul was just doing what he thought was right. And how often do we think we are doing what we think is right? It's like, we're like, oh, I thought that was the right thing, or I thought I was helping. And really, in reality, you're not. You're not helping. You're not doing the right thing. But in our ideas, in our minds, in our limited vision, we are doing something that's out of line with God's plan. So the Bible has a lot of stories of people who exemplify patience. One of my favorites is Genesis 29, 20 through 28, where it talks about Jacob. And it says, so Jacob served 27 years for Rachel, and they seemed like to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Can you imagine that love? Like, I worked 7 years for free for Taylor, but it's like that because I just love her so much. Each day is just a joy. I get to be with her. And then Jacob says to Laban, give me my wife that I may go to her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Jacob talking about deception, okay? Just let's put that out there. So Laban says, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Please complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. And Jacob did so. He completes his week with Leah. Then Laban gave him Rachel to be his wife, and he works another 7 years for free. This guy works 14 years and gets 2 wives out of the deal. One of them he didn't even want. And I got nothing against Leah, right? I got nothing against Leah. She is probably a really nice person. But what the Bible says is she's an eyesore. Like, I can only imagine. But Leah was the childbearer, all right? So Leah still found favor in God's eyes. But because Laban couldn't pawn her off, he had to sneak her into the deal, and he gets another 7 years out of it. Like, Laban is a genius. Laban is this genius right here. And Jacob, I don't know. He's a fool. Really, like, I get it. It's probably dark. They don't have lights like we have. He's probably, the day of feasting and everything like that. He's probably a little loopy and everything. So who knows? Either way, Hebrews 11, 13 through 16. This is where it lists the heroes of the faith. This is a very powerful chapter. It's talking about all the heroes of the faith. And it's going on and on and on and listing all these people. And then it says this in verse 13. But all these died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. That is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. The first line of that passage is ridiculously powerful. These all died in the faith. They died not witnessing the promise that God had made to them. Can you imagine that? Holding on to that promise of God and not seeing it come to pass, but die knowing that it will still be, that God will still be true, that God is going to hold on to that promise, that he will not let it fall short. And these people are now listed as heroes of the faith because they died in the faith. They believe into death. So if I'm here and I'm like, Gareth, I promise that I'm going to give you $100. I promise. But then I never do this, right? And I just kind of walk on and just keep doing my thing. And Gareth's over like, well, when am I going to see that money? And then does Gareth become the person who is like, hey, Jake, where's that $100? 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 Hey, remember that time that you said you were going to give me $100? Yeah, where is that? Hey, Jake, remember that $100? I'm not seeing any of that. Where is that? Or does he just trust that my promise will come to pass? God's promises have never fallen short. They do not fall short. Whether they see it in life or after death, they do not fall short. My favorite example of patience in the Bible is Jesus. Jesus dealt with some serious, stressful moments, some serious junk. And, outside of the Pharisees, that alone is enough to just drive you nuts. He has his wishy-washy crowds when he starts talking about, you have to eat of my body and drink of my blood. People are like, whoa, I don't know. And then they all just like, they're like, oh yeah, he does miracles, but I'm not about that. But on top of all that, Jesus has to deal with his 12 disciples. And on top of that, Jesus has to deal with Peter. Like, he's awesome. But Peter's also just like this loose cannon. And I feel like when they say, Peter, you are the rock, that it's not only, it's what's going to come, but I feel like because God has such a great sense of humor that he was making a joke. Because not only does Peter, who does walk on water for a step or two, sink like a rock, but I feel like sometimes Peter's head was a rock when he was talking. Sometimes Peter says things and it's just like, why? Why, man? Why? And like he gets it right a couple times, but other times like, Peter, what? But then Acts happens. Jesus dies. He ascends, sends the Holy Spirit, and Peter becomes, this rock becomes a wrecking ball. A rolling stone. A rolling stone gathers no moss, right? But he's just working in Christ. He's working in this power, and it's just, things are happening. His shadow is healing people. As he walks past people, his shadow is healing people. He's being thrown into prisons, and he's like, I don't care. I will not please you. I'm only here to please God. Peter is human. Yes, he messes up, but can you imagine your shadow healing people? Like, how awesome is that? Your shadow. You walk by someone, and like your shadow falls on them, and like, wow, my broken leg's healed. Like, how cool would that be? Like, if your shadow goes in healing people. So Jesus puts this time. He invests himself in Peter. And while for a long time it seems like this guy doesn't get it. This guy's a dope. Like, what is going on? He gets it. And he becomes this wrecking ball. And it's just so amazing. So, application, right? Galatians 5, 22 and 23. Let's talk about the fruit of the Spirit. Now, when I was writing this sermon, right here, I was about to scrap this whole thing. Like, I'm about to scrap this because I'm like, this is going nowhere. I have got nothing. And I was telling Taylor this too. Like, I was about to just delete it and start from scratch, or just write a whole new message or whatever. And then I'm reading this. And I knew I wanted to get to this point. But when I read it, it was like almost like I was reading it for the first time. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there are no law. Patience is in there, right? But this is the idea I had while I was reading this. And this is the idea I want to put before you today. That none of this fruit listed is possible without the others. Okay? So let's just, in the scope of patience, self-control, right? you need to have patience in order to maintain self-control. Because how easy would it be just to lose it because you're impatient with somebody, or impatient with the person taking too long to get you your food in your McDonald's checkout line. Gentleness. You need patience to continually and constantly show gentleness to even those who don't necessarily deserve it. Faithfulness. We see it in Hebrews. The heroes of the faith, they demonstrate faithfulness. They die in faithfulness. That is patience right there. Kindness, goodness, much like gentleness, they need patience to constantly be shown. Peace. How great will it be when you master patience? If you mastered patience, how peaceful would that be? Like if you can just roll with anything and just continually just like, yeah, that's good, I got this, and like just be patient in all things. Peace comes from that. Joy, the reward of patience. And love. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. Love is patient. Love is kind, does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. That it is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. It endures all things. Endurance takes patience. Like I said earlier, we are a society that wants things now. We are a microwave society. Paul likes to call this a race. He refers to it as a race multiple times. And we like to think that we're sprinters. We like to just go. Because there is glory in the 100-meter dash. But when you sit and watch a 3-mile race, it's a little bit more boring, right? Have you ever gone and watched a marathon? I have. I've taken part, but I've also gone and watched friends do a marathon. It's a long time you're going to be sitting there. Now, can you imagine watching an ultra-marathon, 100-plus miles of people just running? No thanks, right? No thanks. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit for that long watching them. But can you even imagine running that? That's still a long time. That is a long time to be running. And Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. This is a race. We are not called to be sprinters. We are not called to just go. No, we have to run with endurance the race set before us. If you can sprint a marathon, good for you. I want to see it. Chicago Marathon's coming up in the fall. I want to see that. But that hasn't been done, right? It hasn't been done. Those times would be dropping a lot more if people were sprinting a marathon. The book of Hebrews was being written to persecuted, suffering Christians. They were being beaten. They were being jailed. They were being run out of town. They were being murdered. And yet they're hanging on to their faith. These Christians are suffering horrible persecution, and they're still clinging to their faith. And yes, the book of Hebrews was written to encourage them, but they were still there to be encouraged. They were still there holding on to that faith. And yet we're held back in a society that, okay, our persecution is still there. We have become a very persecuted group of people, but compared to what this church dealt with the murdering and stuff, and in America, I'm just talking about American Christians, we're not experiencing that. We're not being murdered. We're not being beaten up. We're not being run out of towns. But we're worried about offense. We're worried about being made fun of or being looked at differently. But Romans 5, 3 through 5 says that. It says this, not only that, but we rejoice in our suffering, knowing that suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Endurance produces character. And I was reading this, and this is what I asked myself. What kind of character am I? A lot of times we'll be like, oh, that guy, he's a character. And it's like, he's a funny guy. He's a jokey. But like, what kind of character am I? Who am I? What kind of characteristic do I have? Am I a hero? Or am I just an extra? Am I just in the chorus? So, how do we make this happen? How do we build patience? How do we become this better character? How do we become the hero? Okay? Who here knows the name Lilias Trotter? Anyone know that name? Lilias Trotter, a missionary to Algeria for more than 30 years, from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So, outside of all of our time, but anyway. So she's in her garden one day, and she's here, sitting in her garden, just praying to God, and she would, it was written that she would spend hours in her garden, and she's just sitting there one day, just praying to God, and she's just praying and praising God, and just sitting there, and she notices this flower, and there's this flower in the garden, and as she's there, she's spending so much time in this garden that she sees the flower follow the sun. She watches this flower follow the sun through the sky. And she's watching this, and she writes down these words: "Turn your soul's vision to Jesus and look at him, and a strange dimness will come over all that is apart from him." So, she makes this leaflet called Focus, and she sends it back to the church. And 2 decades later, 20 years later, a woman by the name of Helen Lamel comes across this leaflet. And Helen Lamel is a songwriter. And she is just coming, she's just looking for some inspiration. She reads this passage out of this leaflet. And these words, they just grip her heart, and she cannot get out. She said that it was quoted that she immediately knew that this was the lyrics of this song, that this was this. And we know this song today. This flower following the sun is the same as, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." And this is not the end of the story. Yes, great hymn comes from this, but it is not the end, because these words would become her lifeline. Helen becomes very sick. She is diagnosed with an affliction that results in blindness. Her husband cannot cope with the reality. He abandons her. He abandons their marriage. He leaves her on her own. He leaves a blind woman on her own. Jerk. Okay? So what might have been a debilitating experience physically as well as emotionally, it only turns her more completely towards God. And this vocation that she has, this songwriter, she composes in her blindness over 500 hymns, lyrics, and music. And many of them are still in circulation today. 500 hymns that this woman writes, she composes in her blindness. She turns her eyes upon Jesus. But how do you do that when you're blind? Right? It was the eyes of her heart she's talking about. It's not your eyes. You don't turn your eyes upon Jesus. But in that sense, I love Stephen, right? Stephen at the end, he is being pelted with rocks to death. And the way it would happen for, I was reading, and one of the ways that stoning would happen that I liked was because the cities were built up on cliffs, they would take them to the outside of the city, so they would take him to the cliff and they would throw him out. So they throw him off a cliff, and then they start throwing rocks down on him. And this is what I like about this, is that when Stephen is looking up at his persecutors and beyond them, his eyes are on Jesus. So Stephen is looking through his persecutors to Jesus. His eyes are on Jesus. And the things of earth grow strangely dim. And he's welcomed with open arms. So, Romans 8:24 and 25 says, "For in this hope we are saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what they see? If we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. We turn the eyes of our heart on Christ. Christ, the author and perfecter of our faith. And let it be my prayer and your prayer today, that we would die in this faith, patiently holding on to the promises of God. Let us not grow weary as we run with endurance the race that is set before us. In the end, when we reach that finish line, man, I tell you what, when we reach the finish line, I know this, and this I hold on to with everything in my life. It will be worth it. The end is worth it. There is nothing else that is going to bring the satisfaction that you will have when you reach the end of this race and you look into the face of God and he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." When I think about those words, every single time I get choked up. Every single time my arm hair is raised, and I got a lot of arm hair raised up there. It looks like a darn forest right now. Every single time when I think of those words, when I think of just looking in his glorious face and hearing, "Well done, good and faithful servant," it's like, why would anything else matter? Why does anything else even matter? This is all there is. This is what is important. We have to run this race. Who cares about the race of pursuing more stuff? Who cares about the race of being better at your job? There's nothing wrong with getting stuff and being better at your job, but if that is the race that you're running, then you're running the wrong race. If you're running the race of finding a relationship, if you're running the race of having the best family, which, sorry, you guys are all losing to me anyway. I love you guys. But have you seen Evie? Have you seen my wife? I don't know how it happened to me. That's called favor, people. All right. But anyway, beside the point. That's way off point. This race, this gospel is worth it. This is everything. This needs to be everything to us. This has to be the race that we run. This has to be our focus. What do you set your eyes on? Because I tell you what, if you are setting your eyes on anything else other than the face of God, everything else is going to be a distraction. It's all going to be a distraction. So I want to close with this. I'm going to go back. Because Saul missed it. But I don't want us to miss it. We still have that chance. Saul missed it. Impatience will cause you to miss God's blessings. Your impatience will cause you to miss out on the blessings of God. Saul was going to have his kingdom established forever. And in his impatience, in one hasty move, it all comes crumbling down. Do not miss the blessings of God. Do not miss this, because this is worth it. This is everything. There is nothing else. At the end, look into the face of God and hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I'm going to close up with some prayer.